Welcome to a conversation about the inaugural Empathy Week and an exploration about the significance of empathy as a concept, specifically in the pandemic world that we're all living through in 2021. And specifically, as we are representing the PRCA, we'll be thinking about the place of empathy within the PR and communications industry. So, I am going to stop talking and allow my lovely co-collaborator, Ed, to introduce himself before we dive into learning more about what Empathy Week is. Hi, Ed. Welcome.
Thanks, Jane. So my name's Ed Kirwan. I'm previously a teacher in North London. Actually used to be a science teacher, turned filmmaker, and I suppose some people describe me as a social entrepreneur. But I've founded Empathy Week last year, and basically what we do is we are trying to develop a generation of young empathic leaders and students and give them an opportunity to develop the skills of empathy, but particularly through the power of film, and enable them and empower them to believe that actually they have the ability to change their world as well, whether that's their small community or whether that's on a global scale as well.
Amazing. And I want to hear more about the videos and the platform. And I
Mm.
must correct myself already. I thought this was the inaugural year. I'm so
No,
sorry.
no,
Year two.
we decided to launch in a great time last year, end of February, um,
Ooh,
and still we're working around it. But I think it's never been probably a better time for it, actually, in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
yeah. We are definitely going to talk a lot about that. Thank you. And I should also just briefly introduce myself. Jane Fordham. I'm a people consultant and head of people at Hanbury Strategy. And I'm a PRCA trainer. And my sort of specialist subject is around people and leadership and well-being. And I do also a lot around inclusion and diversity and emotional intelligence, and the subset of empathy is something that I focus an awful lot on. It's a real passion of mine, kind of personally and professionally. So it's wonderful to be here talking to you, Ed. So yeah, you've just sort of set up the origins of Empathy Week a little, and talked about the films, which I know will also be sharing. They are. I had the pleasure of consuming that content last night. Very impressive. Very
Thank you.
moving and emotive content.
Mm.
Please do tell us a little more.
Yeah, so I suppose I'll start with like the idea of where it came about. As a teacher, there's a particular group of students that I taught called the U Gang, which I didn't call them that, they called themselves that. And it was a group of 24 boys, 15, 16 years old, year 11s, failing, getting U grades in their chemistry, science mocks at Christmas. 3 months to go to their GCSEs, and it was this group of lads that in North London who, children are children, but their circumstances have meant that some of them were affiliated with gangs, some of them were affiliated with things they shouldn't have been. But actually, underneath all of that, and underneath what we kind of see in newspapers, all this sort of thing, it's the stereotypes that we have, are actually lovely young lads who are scared and just need a bit of empathy. And I don't mean empathy in terms of kindness or compassion. I mean understanding. Actually, me as a teacher, okay, you've come to school and I know you haven't had breakfast because you've told
Yeah.
me that and you don't have that. So I know why you're late, and I know why you've got a McDonald's milkshake in your hand, and I know that's going to send you off the wall. But at least now that I can react to that in a way that I can teach you in the right way. So I would find out more about them, but also it goes the other way. How can they learn if they don't trust me? How can they learn if I don't give a little bit of my personality towards them, tell them about stuff? And I remember with some of my friends, I used to go, sometimes skiing at the week, in a half term. And some of my friends said, "Don't you think that's a bit much? Showing them you're on a holiday?" And I said, "They think that I'm teaching because I can't do anything else. If they know that I can afford a ski holiday whilst teaching, maybe that's a bit of a boost for them, bit of an aspiration. Plus, I used to film myself doing like starter videos for the lesson, and they all used to cringe and laugh and take the mick out of me.
Of
But it
course.
showed them that actually, whilst I was on holiday, I was also thinking of them. So
Yeah.
it's not me showing off; it's them understanding my lifestyle, my environment, that I don't sleep under my desk at school. And from that, I played basketball as well. It helped. I'm 6'5". That also helped with a group
Wow.
of young men. You know, I'm not going to lie. You know, being male and quite physically tall helps with that. But the fact that I played basketball as well, they couldn't get that into their brains that a science teacher plays basketball and is better than them. And so I started to build this understanding. And Empathy Week came 3 years later when I'd done a bit of social work around homelessness and things like that. And I thought, now my filmmaking's got to a certain point. This is what schools need. This is what I needed when I was trying to get them to open their bubble and realize that the world is larger than their borough, larger than their town. And if they can get this and understand that and see a little bit of someone else 7,000 miles away that represents them as well, it can only lead to good things. And so we decided to use the power of film because that's what young people are used to. TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever it is, that's how they take information on board. And films is hugely powerful and scientifically proven to help us develop empathy. So if we can do this and we can bring it into schools every year and it's scalable. So, you know, last year we reached 48 countries across 6 continents. So schools watching it from all over the world. If we can do that, if we can do that year on year, we can actually really develop empathy by giving them a chance to watch the films, helping teachers with the resources. And then actually we also have an empathy action project. So over 6 weeks after the week, they actually take on this. And I know I've gone on a little bit, but the one last thing I will add is that if you take a child that's 5 years old this year, so next week, Empathy Week, or today, if you're watching this now, a child who's 5 years old, if they take part in Empathy Week every single year of their life till they're 18, they will have come across 65 and watched 65 different people's life stories from 13 different countries before they enter the working world. Imagine employing an 18, 19-year-old as an apprentice or someone into the industry that has an understanding of different cultures, religions, creeds, biases. That's the power, and that's what we're trying to do. And it's not a short-term thing. It's very much a long-term mission.
Cumulative build. Such rich content there. So many things I'd love to pick up on. And thinking, as I said at the outset, about specifically about the industry that the PRCA represents, communications and PR. Content is a big part of that. So, you know, what you say about the power of image, the power of film, how people can connect to that, the distribution channels and so on is you know, every day to the people that be watching and listening this. So that's very, very relevant. Some words I kind of picked out from what you were saying there as well. It's about kind of going right back to where this came from and the group. I've already forgotten the name. I should have written that down.
Well, it's not a name I want to call them, the U Gang, but the name came from them coming up the stairs chanting U Gang, which actually for me showed their complete fear. You know, why would we even, if we've already failed, why would we even try?
We're in defensive mode, and concepts that you used like trust and context and relatability, I think were tools for them to break down for you to break down those barriers, that defensive wall, for them to see you as human and somebody who was on their side. So all of this obviously very much falling well within the realms of empathy. So that's brilliant introduction. Thank you. Just wanted to add a little bit of kind of context around empathy in the workplace and where I think empathy might be in 2021 to further colour this discussion. So I think empathy has been very current in sort of management and leadership terms for actually since before the pandemic, but I think very much risen to the top of the agenda since then. We're told frequently that it's very important, that it's very valuable for leaders to demonstrate empathy. And I think for me, empathy is a bit of a bedfellow with vulnerability. And as you demonstrated, if you allow a little bit of yourself, if you show a little bit of yourself, that engenders empathy from somebody else. It engenders connection and strengthened bonds. I think I said at the outset that very often empathy is interchangeable or is deemed interchangeable with emotional intelligence. Now, I would suggest that empathy is a component of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is a much larger sort of landscape, and there are many, many different facets. Empathy is the key part of it. It's not the only part of it. We're also taught against the backdrop of, huge technological advance. and things like the advent of machine learning, AI, and so on, other innovations are stripping out a lot of the automated, sort of repeatable elements of work across all different sectors. And if we think specifically about, PR sits within the
Hmm.
creative industries. So emotional intelligence and empathy and our cognitive processes have just become more important. So it's the elements that make us human that we're kind of retaining, and that's what sets us apart. So I think a lot of what you've talked about is coming from a very sort of emotive, youth oriented level. But if we push transcend slightly into the workplace, I think there's a very sort of real business driver, actually, far and beyond the moral imperative as you've described. This actually makes business sense as well.
Hmm.
So that's quite uh, an expansive look at how I think empathy plays into the management, leadership, and commercial landscape currently. I'd love your perspective on where we find ourselves right now, and I'll try not to swear. It's been a largely 12 months ish. Obviously, COVID has precipitated what John Amici, the wonderful John Amici, has described as a
Ah.
global trauma that we're all still living through. And it started off as a sprint, and here we are 12 months later, still working through this trauma. However, I am an optimist, and I think we can all acknowledge there's a lot of silver linings within that global challenge. One of them, I think, is this tsunami of kindness, which again, I think sits with empathy and overall emotional intelligence. So, Ed, I'd love to hear your perspectives. And you said that you'd launched this kind of right before
Mm.
COVID properly arrived on our shores. What do you think? How do you think empathy has showed up during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, John. It's funny you mentioned John Amici. I know John Amici personally, actually, because I got him to come to my school when I was
Amazing.
teaching, and
Lucky, lucky
he is
kids.
a, yeah, he's a person that embodies empathy right through. So you should definitely look him up. But in terms of this year, it's interesting, the kindness. I think a lot of people are put off by empathy sometimes because they think it's wishy-washy. It's kindness and it's being lovey-dovey, and it's completely not. It's related to kindness, and empathy can come before kindness. But I think in terms of what have we seen this year, we've seen people, I think, probably step back, have more time to try and understand. WhatsApp groups popping up everywhere. I'm living in South London at the moment. I live in Balham, but I was living in Brixton the first lockdown, and I hadn't even really communicated with people in my block. And then all of a sudden, we're all on a WhatsApp group. Do you need this? Do you need that? Is
Mm,
anything going on?
mhm,
And as we came out of lockdown a little bit as well, people would have drinks on the terrace together, and all of
yeah.
a sudden, you're getting a sense of community
Yes.
and,
Yeah.
and understanding. And this, I suppose, it's almost like warlike, isn't it? This kind of
Yeah.
looking after each other, stepping up for one another. My fear is that we go back to the sprinting lifestyle that we had before, where we're just kind of single track. But I think it's shown up there. I think it's shown up in school. Obviously, I come from a kind of school community background, but there's an amazing story. I can't remember that, but a teacher that walked school lunches every single day to his students because he
Yes.
knew that they wouldn't get fed. And yes, that's a kind act, but it also comes from a deep-rooted sense of empathy
Yeah.
that these kids and their families are going to really struggle if I don't deliver these, and there's no other way to do it. And he just kept going back to the school and grabbing them and going back
I
out.
don't know if that's the same teacher that had a sort of swag bag. So on one shoulder, I think it was food, and the other one was sort of digital equipment for people that didn't have,
Yeah, I
laptops
can't. Probably was.
or
Um,
myriad teachers, perhaps.
yeah, but it's. I think we have to look. The problem with our world at the moment is because we've become even more digitalized now that we can't be in the office,
Yeah.
and we've become more digitalized in just the way that we spend our time. We're on Zooms and we're on this and that. We're on social media, and actually the problem is that social media has so many algorithms which show the extremes
Yeah.
of politics, the extremes of business, the extremes of everything. You rarely ever see the middle ground, which actually is where the answers are to a lot of issues. The middle ground of a lot of things. We rarely see that reflected in the algorithms that Instagram, that Facebook, that Twitter, that TikTok show us. And so we see these, and what we need to do is actually, and what I have been seeing is people starting to kind of almost combat those algorithms. And I think it's the people in business, it's the people in comms that have to represent, you know, stories and use people's stories and use this human element in your communications, because that's how people connect. I saw a fantastic design. I can't remember what agency it was, but it was right at the start where they had nurses, pictures of nurses, and they'd taken their masks off, and underneath they'd, you know, because all the lines and the marks that they got from the masks, and it just had like these nurses holding them, and they'd photoshopped it on, but underneath was like a Spider-Man pattern or a Batman pattern, you know, showing these nurses as superheroes. And for me, that was so striking, because it made me think about another career or another person that I haven't experienced myself, but also see them in a positive light. And I think we're so, you know, it's just so simple but so creative. And I want to see more real stories around business. You know, how many people really know the story of their CEO? Because the CEO probably doesn't want to be too vulnerable. And don't get me wrong, there is, you know, there is leadership levels, and there is, you know, how much you can share between each level, of course. But I think leaders need to open up, because they need to say, I've had a bad day. And it's not about oversharing and all that stuff, but it is about, you know, I have got kids in the background, I've got this, I've got to do that, or, you know, can we have this chat later?
And I think
it's that understanding.
There is, I could fill weeks of videos on the, you know, the landscape of kind of inclusion and the winners and losers. And I think broadly, unfortunately, underrepresented groups are probably coming out worse currently, but you know, we're not done yet. That said, to pick up on your point, I think there is an element of this, the work home work life the work home kind of collision that is a great leveler, because CEOs or interns have cats and housemates and, you know, doorbells going and kids and you know, in the background. So on that level, I think there is an opportunity for CEOs to sort of, well, to peek behind the curtain just enough. Want to move on specifically to sort of some positive and practical takeaways about how empathy can shape a more positive workplace. And I'm thinking about, whilst we're all mostly still remote working, and looking ahead at the journey back into the office, and probably the long tail of a hybrid working environment. So where we have some people at home and some people in a work environment. And obviously thinking specifically about PRs and communicators and so on. How do you think empathy can be proactively encouraged within a workplace?
Yeah, I think it links back to what you said earlier about, you know, yes, empathy is a great thing to have on a human level, but on a business level, the evidence is there. It makes businesses more profitable. It makes businesses, because people feel they belong and are part of something, and they feel that actually my boss isn't coming on the phone to me just to ask me what I'm doing. They actually have a genuine interest. I think the bad news for people who are time constrained is that to develop empathy in your businesses and in your community, it takes time.
Yeah.
And you have to, there's no quick thing. It's like with empathy, we say to schools, your kids aren't going to be empathetic after a week. But if they do it every year and you develop it and you build on things each time, well, they will develop their empathy. And we've been working with an organization called Empathic Intervision, two psychologists who talk really well about self-empathy, you know, or say that empathy starts with self-empathy. And it's a really interesting concept, because how can I empathize with you properly if I don't yet understand the context that I'm in and understand my position in the world? And the way that I describe this to people is if we took everyone that's watching this now and we went to, I don't know, a cinema in Leicester Square at the same time and we watched Star Wars, we all came out of the cinema. If someone interviewed us, we would all give different star ratings. We would say we liked this or we liked that. So we all have our own lens. We've just watched exactly the same film in the same city at the same time, but yet we all come with a different reflection on it. And if we don't acknowledge what we bring to a conversation or what we're bringing to a meeting, and you know, our cultural bias and our unconscious bias, and really try and work at that, how can we even empathize? I can't even start to empathize with you properly, because I'm already thinking in my head the answers in my situation, rather than properly listening to you.
So I was just brilliant point, and I'd love to build on that. Although I was just having a moment where you said, "Imagine we all went to Leicester Square and watched a film together,"
Mhm.
and I just went off and said,
Yeah,
"Wow,
in
imagine that!"
pods.
Yeah, so 3D actually socializing together. Um, I think you are completely right, and I find myself talking whatever the specific topic or framework or brief, frequently talking to leaders, teams, or individuals about self-awareness. Every development point starts with understanding the starting point and understanding your lens. And clearly, if we're being very specific about inclusion and diversity, then that plays a huge role. It also takes me back to your reference at the beginning about your films, and about, if a 5-year-old goes through this
Mm,
empathy week every year and consumes this amount of content, they'll have 65 experiences that they've dipped into by the time they're 65. I think that education, that intellectual curiosity, and potentially the danger with the pandemic of actually doing more of that, either because we're being served up content that is ever narrower, or because we're not able to physically engage and travel so much. But seeking out, doing the work, seeking out alternative perspectives, alternative cultures, listening. My goodness, the power of listening.
mm,
Really, just especially for extroverts and those who talk a lot like
yeah.
myself,
Yeah,
just
guilty.
sitting
Yeah.
back and properly listening to somebody, not
Mm,
waiting to interrupt, but actually hearing what they're saying, which is what the medium of film and your pieces of content are incredibly powerful. People, I
mm,
would encourage everybody, long content, but I would encourage everybody to dip into it. It does deal with some very heavyweight topics, so I
mhm.
guess there's a little bit of a warning to ready yourself for some very heavyweight topics, but incredibly powerful. And actually, I am just before we move on, just pick up on the true definition of empathy
Mm,
is not actually treating others as you wish to be treated, but treating
mm,
others as they wish to be treated. And that comes from the starting point of actually listening to them and asking them direct, open questions. So I think, again, in the context of management, absolutely 99% of the time coming from a very good place, you project your experiences into a situation and you treat the other person as you assume they would like to
mhm.
be treated based on your experiences. Noble, but probably incorrect. So, where we can strip that away and make sure that we are giving that person the platform to be understood and to be listened to, and then adapting our responses accordingly, incredibly powerful. And I think, again, in the context of communications and PR, it's essentially doing that, but on probably a larger scale. So, audience understanding, audience
Yeah,
insights, so that we can actually land the right message to the right people, and
yeah.
cut out all of those assumptions.
It's a problem that I have with, and I actually, loads of schools and kids that engage with it use this saying, right? Putting myself into someone else's shoes, and I let it go because it's the most common used phrase. But actually, for me, there's a problem with it, because, like you've just said, if I'm stepping into someone else's shoes, that's me coming in with my ideas and my
With your
beliefs and
socks
systems and my
in their
socks. Yeah,
shoes.
exactly.
Yeah.
Actually, empathy is about being invited into someone else's shoes by that person taking them off and saying, look, and I'm going to take you through what I see in the world, and you're going to listen, you're not going to talk. Because actually what we do is we go, oh yeah, I'll go into that. And I always use an example of, and maybe it's because I did various things around homelessness, but you see a man on the street and you go into a supermarket, you come out with a ham sandwich. Oh, because he's homeless, he must be hungry and he must like ham because I like ham. You give him a ham sandwich and he looks up to you and says, oh, I don't eat ham, I'm a vegan.
Yeah.
And your head straight away goes, how can this guy be a vegan? Vegans are, blonde, pretty on Instagram, and they're rich and they're wealthy and all this sort of stuff. He's homeless, beggars can't be choosers. And it's exactly the problem we have with humanity. It's the problem we have that we assume that someone can't be something because of their position, or can't be this, rather than actually engaging with that person and saying, hi, I'm this, what's your name? That person might not have been asked their name for 4 or 5 days, maybe a week,
Yes.
a year. And
Yeah.
actually, this is the gripe I have with kindness and empathy being mushed together. They're very well connected, but I always say kindness is wasted without empathy. If you are doing a kind act, but you don't understand the person and the environment that person is in, you are not necessarily helping them. It's just, thinking about Auschwitz and, when they were liberated, there's a story about they started handing out food straight away to the prisoners and the survivors of the Holocaust, but they had to stop really quickly because they've been so malnourished, and they were going to kill them.
Couldn't digest. Yeah.
Couldn't digest it. They wouldn't. So again, that's just it's not a very nice example, but even when we see people in their most extreme need, we have to stop being saviors and think that we know best. And that's an extreme example, but it happens in the workplace as well. You see someone upset, or you think someone's somewhere. Before you act, before you send that email, before you think about that campaign, engage with the people that you are trying to help, because ultimately that's what every business is trying to do: solve problems and help people, whichever area you're in. So understand the people.
Yes, your homeless example reminds me of my wonderful son, who I learned an awful lot from, who's very passionate about homelessness. And obviously it was pre-lockdown. We spent some time in Borough. We live out in Surrey, but came into Borough Market, and he always makes sure that we stop and talk to homeless people. We don't walk past them. There's eye contact and engagement. And actually he asked, it wasn't Borough, it was Waterloo Station. He had a chat to this guy. He asked him what he needed, and actually he wanted a notebook and a pen because he was writing a book, and somebody had stolen it. So the next time we came through, and that was such a simple gesture, but yeah, it completely illustrates your point. Time flies when you're having fun, so we're going to need to draw things to a close fairly soon. But you obviously focus a lot on schools and backgrounds as a teacher. So getting the message out there, understandably at the grassroots level, makes a lot of sense. Of course it does. Embedding empathy in personalities and value systems really early on. Our industry, the PR industry, apart from me, is quite a young industry. So do you think that young people are better at empathy? So do you think it's useful to sort of, re-educate our industry from the ground up, or is there hope for older, more mature individuals?
Empathy, I would say empathy is a muscle, right? So whether you've used it recently or not, you still got it, but it might just take a bit of dusting off, and you might feel a bit weird or achy when you first use it again. So absolutely not. I think start at 91 if you wanted to. Change your. I'm a massive optimist. I think people need to start looking at empathy as, again, I'm really not a person that's into like lovey-dovey and wishy-washy stuff. I've got a science background. I've got a biochemistry degree. I was a science teacher. I like facts, I like evidence, and I like things that work. And my experiences, whether that's been in Mexico at the Homeless World Cup, or India filming slum soccer, or in London and speaking with homeless people, is that if you give time to someone, and for me, I have to actively shut my mouth and tongue, because we're always on the attack, we're always on the response. Everyone will know what I call a story topper. At the weekend I did this, and then that person goes, "Oh yeah, I did that like 2 years ago," or I've been to that restaurant 5 times, and you've just been. Everyone knows a story topper, and that is probably the example of not being empathetic.
Yes.
Holding your tongue, being, listening to someone, or listening to your partner even, or someone, and they've had a bad day and something really great's happened for you. It's about holding your tongue and not saying it. So like the other week, my aunt actually died, and which is was kind of expected, but talking to my mum and not being able to be there with her. But yeah, I had something amazing happen. Like I managed to get a deal with a company that I've been talking to for ages, and I only told her the other day, like 2 weeks later. And I really wanted to say it, but I knew actually this is not the time. And I'm also not here to say I am really good at empathy. And one of my obsessions with empathy is the fact that I don't think I'm very good at it, and I have to keep working at it. But that's the thing. I think everyone can work at it.
We're all uncompleted, unfinished masterpieces, aren't we? So in the last 30 seconds, Ed, let's see if we can manage it between the two talkers here. Any sort of closing thoughts or messages on this week, this Empathy Week 2021?
I always say everyone knows a school or knows a teacher, because everyone's been to school. And then so if you can give that opportunity to young people and make the effort to tweet a school or message a school, do it. We make our program free to every single state and government school across the world. So it's free for them. It's there waiting. They have to register to get the resources, but it's there. It can make a huge difference. And I think the other message I have is that people always want tangible things. You know, how do I actually, okay, so great, I've just heard you talk about empathy. It
What's
sounds
the
great.
call to
How do I
action?
actually do something? My one thing would be follow people you don't agree with on social media, because empathy isn't about agreeing, it's about understanding. And if you can understand a different point of view. So I followed Donald Trump until you know, he got kicked off, because I wanted to see the absolute garbage coming out of his mouth.
And then you can understand
and then you
how
can
to
understand
influence.
exactly. And the other thing is, in a physical sense, go out of your comfort zone, go out of the people. It's very easy. I can empathize with my brother like that because I was brought up in the same household as him, and he's very close to me. The further you get away from your circle, the harder it is to empathize, and that is when you will develop it and become better at it. So that's my
Develop that muscle. Here. Brilliant. Ed, congratulations on Empathy Week 2 and the really, really emotional and hard-hitting and important content. So thank you, and all the participants in the film that brought their very powerful stories. So thank you. And yeah, the message is out there. Share the words. Be empathetic this week, but every week. So thanks, Ed, and thanks, PRCA.
Thank you so much.